So this week's movement demo is gonna be the dumbbell seal rows. So as we're walking through this movement, it's gonna be important to remember that the absolute first step is making sure that you have a proper height of bench or platform, whatever you're gonna be using as your chest support here. So if we scale back a little bit and you look at what we're using here, so this is actually gonna be a seal row bench. So this is specifically designed to perform this movement. Not everybody's gonna be that lucky. Most people are gonna have to use a flat bench and just prop it up on boxes or plates or something like that just to get an elevation. So keeping that in mind, we wanna make sure that you have enough depth here to be able to get a full range of motion. So that is the first step. Because we're using dumbbells, we're gonna be able to get a free range of motion. We're gonna be able to keep our hands neutral, semi-pronated, whatever is gonna be the most comfortable here. I'm gonna go with a semi-pronated grip just because that is the most comfortable for me. As we're going through this, it's gonna be really important to look at a couple things here. So the first thing is because we are doing this with chest support, we should be able to get a really comfortable reach and stretch at the bottom of the range of motion to really protract and push apart our shoulder blades. That will really stretch our mid-back here. And as we're continuing to go through the movement, you wanna make sure that you're actually pulling into your mid-back. So trying to think about pulling here, retracting your scaps, rather than trying to shrug up or trying to pull back to your hip. You wanna make sure that you're targeting the right musculature here. And lastly, you wanna make sure that you keep your chest down, keep your forehead against the bench as well. You don't wanna be pulling your head back. You don't wanna be trying to arch your back too much. It should be very, very strict. This movement is a very, very strict horizontal row. So make sure to use it as it's intended to be used. So I'll go ahead and demo a couple movements here, or a couple of reps here, and we'll go on with it. But important thing here, because this bench is so long, I'm gonna kind of modify this. So I'm gonna get this bench right in my hip and just drape my chest across the bench. So the first big mistake that I see with these seal rows is whenever people are trying to row, they just think that it's inherently lat driven. They're like, I need to really bias my lats. I need to feel my lats whenever I'm doing this. So seal row is a true horizontal row. It's not really meant to be a lat movement. You're gonna feel much more mid-back and even rear delts whenever you're performing this. So actually go with the flow here. Don't try and make it something that it's not. Don't try and swing the dumbbells back towards your hip. You wanna row straight up, row against gravity, not swinging into gravity. So a good example of the mistake I'm talking about will be this. Watch the vectors as I perform a couple of movements incorrectly and then a couple of them correctly. So the second big error that I always see is people just not getting enough range of motion on the top and the contraction of the movement. So you really want to think about pulling your shoulder blades together and think about squeezing them, almost pinching a pencil between them. That will really get that retraction and get that full range of motion through your mid-back, which is what we're looking for here. A lot of times people have the tendency to just try and like muscle it up with their forearms and their biceps and not actually get the retraction and that pullback of your shoulder blades that we're looking for. So whether it's because the load is too heavy, they're fatigued, whatever it might be, you just always want to think about pulling back, retract. So a couple of bad ones and a couple of good ones. And then the last real big error is just not allowing enough room and clearance at the bottom of the rep to actually get a full range of motion. So with this bench, it's designed for seal rows. It's really elevated, got a lot of range of motion at the bottom there. You're not gonna have to worry about hitting the dumbbells on the floor. For most benches, you're gonna either have to elevate it way up or you're gonna have to modify it in some capacity to actually be able to get a full range of motion. Otherwise, you're just gonna be smashing the dumbbells against the floor. So with this bench down here, this traditional flat bench, obviously, if I'm trying to perform seal rows here, it's gonna be somewhat problematic. So here, it's just not gonna work. See, it just does not work. So you can cut this up on blocks, you can prop it up on plates, you can put it on people's shoulders, it doesn't really matter. But you want to make sure that you can actually get that full range of motion, because the biggest aspect of the seal row, chest support, which allows you to get that full stretch, that full traction, and really target your mid-back. So a regression off of the dumbbell seal rows that is going to require a little bit more low back involvement is just going to be a standard seated neutral cable row. So whenever we're doing it here, I like to use individual handles just to mimic the dumbbells that we were using over there. Get a little bit more freedom of motion at the shoulders, not be locked into anything. Put a little less stress on the wrists and on the elbows as we're performing this. But you still want to mimic the seal row with a very strict and very rigid upper body and torso position. So you don't want to get a lot of hip and low back flexion extension. You want to make sure you're locked in and you keep it very strict. So here, you keep it very horizontal here. Then another pretty simple horizontal row variation is just going to be a TRX inverted row. So going back to the dumbbell seal row, chest support takes a lot of pressure off of the low back. Inverted rows, same thing. We're actually going to really remove the low back involvement from the movement, which is a great regression off of anything that is going to be, a typical horizontal row, like a barbell row, a bent over row, that puts a little bit more stress on your low back, a little bit more strength and rigidity, stability requirements. Here, going to eliminate a lot of that and just kind of focus more on the actual horizontal rowing component. Still is a really difficult movement though. So with this, you can actually increase or decrease the difficulty depending on the angle of your body relative to the straps here. So for me, I'll just demo it here, but I want to make sure that you are in a good straight position. And importantly here, same thing with either regressions or progressions that we're going to be doing, making sure that you're really mimicking the shoulder blade movement. So that protraction to stretch, that deep retraction in the contraction, retraction in the contraction. That's what we're looking for here, no matter what we're doing. That is actually going to be the standard for any regression progression that we're going to be actually implementing. So a really simple progression from the seal rows here is just going to be a bent over dumbbell row. Obviously a little bit different than a barbell row. You have more freedom of movement, which is why we're going to just progress the dumbbell seal row into the bent over dumbbell row with no chest support. So adding a little bit more of that advanced factor there, you're gonna have to support it with your low back, support it with your abs. It just creates a little bit more of a conflict there for some people who don't necessarily have that stability or that strength. But for those that do, those that are a little bit more advanced, bent over dumbbell row, great progression here. So try and make sure that you get that same torso angle, that horizontal angle, and then from there, it's the same movement. So the biggest problem with this is that at the bottom, you still want to get that protraction and that deep stretch, but it does place a little bit more stress on your low back. So if you don't have a strong low back, you deal with a little bit of low back pain, probably gonna want to stay with a progression into a seal row variation. So that chest support is always gonna be super important. And another progression off of the dumbbell seal row is just going to be a barbell-based seal row. So we can go with a straight bar, we can go with a Swiss bar, we can go with a cambered bar. I typically like some kind of cambered bar because you're actually gonna be allowed to get more range of motion. You're not gonna hit the underside of the bench whenever you're rowing up at the top. So here we actually are using a cambered Swiss bar variant, so it's actually the best of both worlds. I like using something that doesn't lock me into pronated position on the row. So this is actually gonna be a good bet. Same exact thing, you're gonna be flat, seal row position, you're just gonna be using a loaded barbell variant. So here, try and gracefully get up here. There are a couple final addendums that I just want to make to finish up the dumbbell seal rows and our breakdown of the movement. So obviously, I think that this is a very great movement for pretty much anybody to be able to incorporate into their training, whether they're a beginner or an advanced athlete, whether they're training for hypertrophy, for strength, for whatever. The biggest, I guess, barrier for people to be able to incorporate this movement is going to be the setup. And it seems almost elementary because you understand just inherently, okay, like I need to have something that is flat. I need to be able to go chest supported on it. And I also need to have something that is, high enough to allow for a sufficient range of motion. But you'd be surprised how few flat benches are actually made and can accommodate something like this. So that is the real life issue that I run into most frequently whenever I program this movement for clients and whenever I was coaching people in person for a really long time. That was actually something that we ran into pretty frequently, and it's pretty frustrating whenever you're trying to incorporate seal rows, because I do think that they're a phenomenal movement. Most people will not actually be able to set this up with a barbell or a Swiss bar. They're just not that fortunate. If you do have a gym that has a seal row bench, consider yourself lucky. You're one of the few, but definitely utilize that if you have that opportunity. Seal rows are one of those movements that, I think get overlooked a lot because a lot of machines actually basically take that same movement pattern, replicate it, and just make it a little bit more standardized and easy to incorporate. But I still think that there is a value to using free weights, using dumbbells, using barbells at times, to be able to actually propagate strength, hypertrophy, and just get that movement pattern down. As much as machines are a great tool to be able to use, they also can be a pretty bad crutch at times, because a lot of machines are made and manufactured just poorly in respect to biomechanics and individuality. So that is a big thing that I often see whenever it comes to any kind of horizontal row, and namely a chest supported horizontal row. So that's why I do really favor specifically dumbbell seal rows whenever I have the opportunity to program them for clients. They have been phenomenal for being able to overcome back injuries, for being able to solidify any kind of upper back or mid back or rear delt deficiencies that we have, because they do just really allow for that free scat movement that a lot of people are missing whenever they're doing any kind of row variation. So highly recommend incorporating this, at least trying it out, see how you like it. Most people tend to enjoy it, maybe don't enjoy having to really scale back the load compared to a traditional bent over row, but that is actually a feature, not a bug. So thank you. If you have any additional questions, make sure to just shoot them over to me or just drop a comment.